And I don't know, does anybody have any answers at least to those first couple ones?
Mr. Russell.
Council met in an executive session to discuss a property purchase, and we gave approval to the administration to negotiate with property owners for properties. The reason we did is because we thought it was in the best interest of the city to purchase those properties, specifically because these properties are located on the north side of the benching that's going to happen on the east, north of the river, east of Main Street, and we have hired a company to come and look at doing design work for making that in essence, potentially like a riverside, a park next to the side of a river, and so it would be in that area. And it was determined that there was council's opinion. It has not been, the purchase hasn't been approved. It's on our agenda, so we have to go through a voting process. But if council agrees, then they would be purchased. But my view of it is because of their location to this potential greening of this downtown area, it made sense to have more control of the land. As it was, the county had purchased pretty much every other property around that, but for some reason the county was not willing to purchase these three properties, and so the city is going in the process of making it, and that's the answers to the questions that I know that you've just asked.
Oh, okay. So so those properties really aren't part of the flood mitigation type thing that the county was interested in. Is that right? I'm assuming, because otherwise the county would have purchased them. Is that right? Are they out of that flood mitigation?
I cannot speak as to why the county does or does not purchase properties. They purchase properties all around. I don't know if they're in a floodway or a floodplain, because I always get the two confused.
Right.
But they are in close proximity to areas that we are going to bench, and that then we are going to mitigate and use for the betterment of the city.
So, okay. So are those properties like the future intended uses, part of like city park type thing? I mean, because that's what you're telling me. You're like looking at a development along the river for park area type?
That's what I would expect to see it used. I don't think you'll see anything else there.
Okay. So it's not going to be resold off for other developments or anything like that, or that's...
I am unaware of any plans to do so, and I would be surprised that anybody would want to do any development in such close proximity to the benching.
Mm-hmm. So we are really just, I don't know. I guess I don't feel like that was an answer as far as we're buying it because for the betterment of the city. I guess it just, there's a lot of properties you could buy for the betterment.
We're not buying it for the detriment of the city.
Yeah. So, but I don't see why those three properties have hit the radar for. I mean, if they're a nuisance property, there's like 20 others. And I don't think that we've ever historically bought properties for being nuisance properties.
Wenda, the mayor behind you, would like to make some comments?
Yeah, no, fine, please.
Yeah, so I think, overall, the article captured the comments and the opinions of this group. I think there's no specific plans for the properties. They are properties that the city has had interactions with on a regular basis, both from zoning enforcement, neighbors' complaints, as well as police involvement. So it is obviously also a property that's very visible and near an area where we're going to be making significant investment. There's no specific plans. I know that there's been some insinuations that that's a specific area where development may occur in the future, and I think we would all hope that development would eventually happen there, but that's not the reason that we're buying this property. That's not why I brought it forward to council. As Councilman Russell mentioned, the commissioners have bought around that area because it's outside the specific footprint of the flood benefit. They chose not to further negotiate because the property owners were wanting a little bit more money than the commissioners wanted to put towards it. But we also still, as we were discussing with the property owners, we still felt it was valuable and within reason. So we obviously looked at information pertaining to county auditor assessment, real estate values. We looked at some of that information, and then just talked to the property owners. They were all fully aware of the work that's going on in that area and potential futures for their properties. And we came to agreements on all of them.
Okay.
Yep.
So, okay.
Any other questions for Wenda? Hearing none, hopefully we answered your questions. If not, you're welcome back anytime.
Okay.
And I'm sure if you contact the mayor's office or any of your council people, they'd be more than happy to
Okay.
take your calls and answer your questions.
All right, great.
One thing
Thanks.
I would
Yeah.
mention, just related to nuisance properties in
Yeah.
general, you're correct, we don't typically go in and purchase them, but if there
Mm-hmm.
are properties that are abandoned, dilapidated, a concern for
Mm-hmm.
public safety, we have gone in a number of those and demolished them.
Okay.
And they're, just
Yeah.
sitting there for then that property owner
Are
to
we
determine.
are these gonna be demolished?
Yes.
Okay, that was just a question.
Yep,
So,
yep.
Okay.
Mr. Russell?
And that's where, and for abandoned properties and that's where you've heard conversation about a land bank. That's a structure or an organization that would help us mitigate those situations. And that's where a land bank would be of benefit. And for some reason, we are, the community has been reluctant to date to avail ourselves of that tool to help to help us with nuisance properties. And I, that's probably the number one complaint I hear. I know that the Nextdoor app, there's some major complaints about an East Sandusky property that evidently is inhabited more by possums and raccoons and squirrels than by people. And when properties become abandoned, it's, there's a balance between property rights and governmental rights. But that would be a tool that we could use in those situations that I wish we had available for us.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we have no written communications tonight. We will, reports of municipal officers and departments.
City Income Tax Monthly Collections Report for April 2022.
Questions or comments? Mr. Stashak.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'll probably have a few comments as we go through the evening tonight. Wanted to make you aware, the tail end of last year, we saw a surge in the income tax that was fairly unexpected. And if you look at your business receipts, and had a good conversation with Mary, who does a wonderful job down there in that department, as to what the reasoning was for some of the larger deposits that we've seen recently. That being said, at your next meeting, most likely, I will present you with some legislation after I file with the county, to adjust our revenue estimate and do an appropriation to your general fund. So monies in these additional funds that have come in will be split between capital improvements and general fund, but I want to at least make it available. The ultimate or the net impact on that, based on how you're budgeted, is limited. However, it will, on your snapshot, bring your budget closer into balance. So I wanted to give you a heads up that's going to happen.
Any other questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Letter from Service Safety Director Martin regarding the City of Findlay joined the National Purchasing Cooperative, doing business as National Buy Board.
Questions or comments? Mr. Wobser.
I'm sorry, Rob, what are we buying through these people? Or, I'm sorry, Rob's not here. Mayor?
No, Rob is watching his daughter compete in the softball district tournament. So I let him off the hook this
Well, good
evening, and
for that.
hopefully Van Buren does well this evening. So this is for the gas aggregation program. So volunteer energy. This one's not? My
No, this is,
apologies.
National Purchasing Cooperative, National Buy Board, DBA National Buy Board.
Yes, I see which one you're looking at. I apologize. I was not looking at that one.
This for the water distribution.
Yeah, go ahead.
You participate in a number of purchasing programs. To make sure there's bidding, the purchasing programs handle the bidding. This is one of the national ones that's out there. In this particular case, Jeff Betts in water distribution needs to buy some things that are going to exceed $50,000, so your bid limits. So provided all the criteria are met and what he is purchasing is on the bid list, and we presume it is based on the conversations he's had, and his expectation is that it is, it will alleviate him from doing the bidding process and be able to move forward. And in theory, we get a better price. So a lot of these programs have been wonderful for you, and you've been able to use it. The most recent one was the big trucks that that you guys appropriated.
Jim, I thought
money
so we have to join, I mean, he's asking us to join this
for.
again.
That's
I thought
right.
we did that once.
Well, you've joined certain ones. There are hundreds
thank you.
of them. So,
Okay.
you're basically matching your need with the provider that goes out and sources bids for the need.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions, Mr. Russell?
Jim, do you know if there's a cost to this, or does anybody, do we just join it?
In this one, I'm not exactly sure, but normally it's de minimis because they make fees through the process, what they do. But sometimes there are fees, and I have to be honest with you, I don't know what it is. I'll shoot an email out and I check on it tomorrow.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
We'll follow up on that, I apologize.
Any other questions? Mr. Russell?
Jeremy, Mayor, is this something that needs happening tonight? Okay.
Okay, next.
Findlay Fire Departmental Activities Report for April 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Russell.
Just a quick, take this as an opportunity to thank Findlay Fire for responding to a fire in my neighborhood I think it was two Sunday nights ago. And I stood with the neighbors to the south of this fire and watched as their hearts sunk with worry about their house and would they ever be in it again. And it's pretty good. It's comforting to have a fire department with professional as Findlay's, and the fact that they did take the time to come and talk to the neighbors to give them assurance, and the fact that their property, well, they slept in their house that night against advice, but still they did, and they were able to due to the professionalism of Findlay Fire. So I do appreciate the fact that we have a crew that does run to danger and serves the community in just the lousiest of times. So thanks to Findlay Fire.
Any other questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Officer Shareholders Disclosure Form from the Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Liquor Control for Better Breakfast Company, Hancock LLC, doing business as the Toasted Yolk Cafe, Findlay, located at 2020 Tiffin Avenue and Patio, for a D5 and D6 liquor permit. A check of the records show no criminal record for those who applied.
Mr. Slough.
I would move bill objection be filed.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor that no objection be filed, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. We will not file an objection.
Letter from Service Safety Director Martin regarding a donation from Revive Salon and Day Spa to Shade Tree Commission.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Findlay Police Departmental Activities Report for April 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
City Planning Commission minutes of April 14th, 2022.
Questions or comments? Minutes to be filed.
Income Tax Board minutes of February 9th, 2022.
Questions or comments? Minutes to be filed.
Summary financial reports as of April 30th, 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Findlay Municipal Court Activities Report for April 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Kalb regarding Federal Highway Administration Grant Application Old Mill Stream Byway Multi-Use Path number 32823500.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Kalb regarding the Martin Luther King Parkway Improvements, project number 3280300.
Questions or comments? Mr. Stashak?
Yes, thank you. Wanted to make you folks aware, the money we're talking about here came from the county, should be returned to the county, and there are additional funds there from this project due to some administrative things that weren't completed when we went to close the project for the administration. This needs done. Once it's done, like I say, there's more money than this, probably double. It's just under, I think, $12,000. We'd like to get it back to the commissioners so they can put it to good use as quickly as possible. So I guess I would respectfully request that you consider passing this a little more quickly tonight so that we can return that money.
Any other questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Kalb regarding third capital improvement appropriation of 2022.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Kalb regarding Han Bright Road Phase 3, fiscal year 2023, PID 108776, project number 32821-800.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from City Engineer Kalb regarding 22 water treatment plant roof replacement, project number 357-22500, and 22 water treatment plant masonry repairs and sealing, project number 357-22600.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from Hancock Regional Planning Commission Grant Administrator Lizzie Ezzinger regarding fiscal year 2022 Community Development Block Grant Funding Applications.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding Taylor Street property acquisition.
Questions or comments? Mr. Stashak.
Sorry, I have so many things for you tonight. Quickly, though, I want to add, I guess, a layer of concern and hope that you guys consider this a little more in depth with regard to need for transparency, overall exposure, and understanding of the community, and based on the fact that we really need to ask ourselves, why these properties? Why would we buy these properties? Particularly when we haven't done this in the past. We have all the rules, guidelines, and pieces and parts that you need in your ordinances combined with the health and safety rules of the state of Ohio and the county to do any work that would need to be done on these properties. That being said, why these properties? I was a little bit surprised at Mr. Russell's comments earlier today. I think based on his involvement with the development of the catalytic plan, he knows more than anybody that this is located right in the heart of one of the areas that want and are desired to be redeveloped by this organization, this private organization. I'm not saying I'm for or against that. I am saying, why does the city need to buy this property or these properties? You look at that, you look at the market and what's happening there. The likelihood in this market that if those were marketed openly, you would get an investor that would go in there and put significant amounts of money into the properties like is happening all over our community. And I'm going to go on the record today and say, not for this property or any of these properties or any property in the county. I agree and stand with our county treasurer. Land bank is not ever an appropriate use of governmental powers, and there is no need, as analyzed by our county treasurer, and he did a thorough study. I stand by the saying, a land bank is a land grab. Land banks were designed for the foreclosure markets in the 2007 era when this state had blight in Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus. They were not designed to be used in communities like Findlay, Ohio, to give a tool that is not accountable to this city government for moving property around. That being said,
Mr. Stashak.
yes.
Will you stick to the
This
subject,
is the
please?
subject.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Russell opened the door to that.
The subject right now is not about land
No.
banks, it's about the
I will
Taylor
finish.
Street acquisition. Thank you.
Yeah, and the last part that you need to think about is, tonight in front of you with regard to acquisition of this property, whether it's held, whether it's developed into a park, whether it's purchased, we have not seen the details of the agreements. We have not seen the full cost breakdown. There's been no discussion of demo costs, long-term use, holding costs. There's been no business cost analysis. And we are in the middle of a strategic planning process for this community. Why in the world would we take steps to purchase things, to move forward with things that may or may not fit into ultimately what the strategic plan is going to be for this body and how it's going to support and develop its community? Those are all my opinions. Those are all my thoughts. I share them openly. I appreciate having the opportunity to share them. And I will say, from a fiscal perspective, based on the history of this city, I see no justification for moving forward with the purchase. I see plenty of justification for solving your problems in other manners, and I hope you vet it completely through your committee process. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Letter to be filed. Oh, Mr. Wobser, I'm sorry.
Just to add on to that, was going to, at the end of the meeting, call an appropriations committee. I'll do the details, but we will discuss this further and get more of those details.
Any other questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Treasurer's reconciliation report as for April 30th, 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Letter from Assistant City Engineer Lee Roush regarding municipal court cask facility.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from Service Safety Director Martin regarding gas aggregation.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed. Committee reports.
The Strategic Planning Committee met on May 3rd, 2022 to discuss documents provided to Planning Next. We recommend to continue the strategic planning process.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the committee report, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The committee report is accepted.
The Planning and Zoning Committee, to whom was referred a request from Van Horn Hoover and Associates Incorporated on behalf of FinTech Limited and Martic Investments Incorporated to rezone Technology Drive, number 11, and Midwest Court on platted lots from C2 General Commercial to M2 Multifamily High Density. We recommend to approve as requested.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve the committee report.
Second, Mr. Ballman. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the committee report, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The committee report is accepted. Legislation, we'll start with one resolution.
First reading for Resolution 14, 2022. A resolution stating what services the City of Findlay, Ohio will provide to the territory proposed to be annexed to the City of Findlay, Ohio, situated in Allen Township, County of Hancock, State of Ohio, and being a part of the southwest quarter of Section 36, Township 2 North, Range 10 East, a tract of land consisting of 3.978 acres of land, more or less.
Ordinances.
Third reading for ordinance 2022-34, an ordinance vacating a certain portion of an existing road right-of-way of McLean Drive, the very southern end of the roadway in the cul-de-sac area, hereinafter referred to as the McLean Drive right-of-way vacation in the city of Findlay, Ohio.
Mr. Hellman.
Move to approve ordinance 2022-034.
Second, Mr. Slough. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Mr. Weisner?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2022-35, an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to enroll the city of Findlay in the Bureau of Workers' Compensation Group Retrospective Rating Plan and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2022-36, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
After conversations with city engineer, there was a desire to get this passed because it involved, this is the asphalt side of our streets work, and and the folks that are working this are in town working Bright Road. And there's also some benefits to from a financial standpoint to get this thing moving. Therefore, I'd move that council's statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2022-036 be given its third reading.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of suspension of the rules, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Mr. Weisner?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Bowman?
Aye. The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its third reading.
Ordinance 2022-36.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Mr. Weisner.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2022-38, an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to sign all necessary documents for membership of the National Purchasing Cooperative, doing business as National Buy Board and National Purchasing Cooperative, and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2022-39, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Baumann.
I would move that the statutory rules of council be suspended and we pass, ordinance number 2022-039 be given its second and third readings.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspension of the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer. Aye. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Mr. Weisner.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer. Oh, already did that. Sorry.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2022-39, ordinance 2022-039.
Mr. Baumann.
I move for passage of ordinance number 2022-039.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Mr. Russell.
Just a quick shout out to Revive Salon and Day Spa for this donation and for hosting the event that raised the money for it. This is pretty neat, and very much appreciate what they're doing to help their city.
Mr. Baumann.
Yeah, I just wanted to also kind of add on to Councilman Russell's comments there. After some kind of discussion with Dave and AJ, we decided that this money would be used to offset the cost of the planting of the trees that were replaced along Main Street, South Main Street here.
Any other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Mr. Weisner.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2022-40, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to execute the necessary grant application or applications and/or agreement or agreements to receive grant funds from the Federal Highway Administration, project number 328-23500, for funding of a multi-use path from the National Scenic Byways Program and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
First reading for ordinance 2022-41, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Wobser.
I'll defer to Councilman Palmer.
Mr. Palmer.
Due to get the project on MLK Parkway closed, I move that council's statutory rules be suspended and this legislation be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All in favor of suspension of the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Mr. Weisner.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. And Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2022-041, ordinance 2022-41.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Mr. Weisner.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Did I
The
miss this?
ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2022-42, An ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director and/or City Engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to advertise for bids where required and enter into contracts for various projects appropriating and transferring funds for said capital expenditures and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2022-43. An ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to enter into an agreement or agreements with the Ohio Department of Transportation for the Han Bright Road Phase 3 fiscal year 2023, PID 108776, project number 32821800, and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2022-44. An ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to enter into contracts with the Garland Company Incorporated for repairs needed at the City of Findlay's, Ohio's water treatment plant, appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Greeno.
I think since there's kind of a deadline for cost on this of June the 1st, I think it would be wise for us to get the statutory rules of council waived on this and give it its second and third reading tonight.
Second, Mr. Ballman. All those in favor of suspension of the rules say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Weisner.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
And Mr. Slough.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2022-44. Ordinance 2022-44.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2022-044.
Second, Mr. Weisner. Discussion. Mr. Wobser.
Just for further clarification on this project, Jeremy, we've got a price that's only going to be held through the end of the month, correct, for this roofing project?
So this is part of one of those cooperative agreement ones with the Garland Company. It's through that. This is through the U.S. Community one, but the price of the sealant for the masonry and the roofing material is going to go up. So after that, they may not, I guess, honor their pricing on that. Even though it is a bid, they don't have to accept that after. But he said June 1st, that pricing, the pricing of that material will be going up. So we want to make sure we get that beforehand.
So given our current economic situation, there's probably a very good possibility that number's going to go up June 1.
Yes.
So by passing this now, we are going to hopefully save ourselves some additional funds.
Yep, we'll be able to lock them into the contract that we were kind of quoted on.
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
And Mr. Weisner.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2022-45. An ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to execute the necessary grant application or applications and/or agreement or agreements to receive grant funds from the Community Development Block Grant Program for the Cooper Rawson Park Green Infrastructure, project number 355-23600, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Matt, at the bottom of this, the letter, there's some conversation about the submission deadline of June 15th, and the desire for you to understand where council's going to be prior to that. I know that I like the creative way that we're looking to put that money to use, but can you work me through the timeline and what we think our total budget on this project is, and like how this plays out? And then the most important question for me tonight is, do you need this passed tonight, or can we do it after after second reading on June 7th?
To answer your most important question, our preference would be to waive the 3 readings and pass it on an emergency basis tonight. We can do it June 7th, but the applications are due June 15th. The state puts us in a little bit of a tough situation. They rolled out the rules for the program on April 20th. At that point, we started discussing what projects would be available and a good fit according to the rules that they laid out on April 20th. And then, so we got those projects lined up, and for your consideration. And so here we are. In terms of the scope of this first project, I'd turn that over to Jeremy. He's more familiar with the scope. This resolution 045 is the Community Development Block Grant allocation, which is roughly around $200,000. So Jeremy will give you some details on the.
So we apply on the 15th today, give an indication when they expect to be announcing awards?
Anytime between July and September.
And then is there a level of confidence that on this project in particular?
Allocation is not competitive, so our confidence that we will receive the funding is 100%. The next grant that we have is competitive, and we can discuss that when it comes up.
So the budget for this project, I'm currently working on that. With this green infrastructure, this is kind of a newer thing that I don't want to say a completely newer thing, but it's a newer concept that we have really utilized out here. With the long-term control plan, that is combined sewer overflows, trying to get a lot of infiltration of the stormwater going into our sanitaries. So with the Rawson Park, that is an area that is always kind of flooding with the rains and stuff, and the area to the south of that, kind of the Shinkle Street area and stuff, experiences a lot of flooding with that. So I've went to a couple of seminars last week on green infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. So we're looking how to use that area that's prone to flooding, to use it as a combined, or not a combined sewer overflow, as a storm sewer overflow that can be utilized when it's not overflowing as some kind of a community park or a wetland green rainwater area type thing, or rain garden. And we'd be relocating that ball field over to the east side. So the budget, I'm still working on that. I can get something over to you guys this week on that. I'm meeting with a couple of people that have experience in this to help me with some pricing, and also our long-term control consultant, talking with them on how this would be structured with our long-term control plan. Try to kind of do get multiple projects all lumped into one to kind of solve the ultimate goal of, like I said, our long-term control stuff, and also make it an area that is usable instead of just using gray infrastructure such as pipes and stuff, be something that community can use in the long run.
And so then, is the project that we're submitting the grant funding for, is that moving the ball field and the green infrastructure, or is the moving the ball field?
No, it will be part of that. So the ball field will have to move for the green infrastructure, so that'll be all lumped into one. So there will be stormwater funds with that, or sewer funds and stuff, all corporate capital funds. It'll be a larger project as a whole. So that's what I'm kind of working through and figuring out, how this is all structured and what it looks like in the end. But ultimately, in the end, it's a stormwater project.
And then parking lot expansions on the west side, or excuse me, on the
East side. Yep. We would have to accommodate for all that stuff.
Mr. Wobson.
And just to be clear, Jeremy, all we're doing tonight is approving you to apply for the grant. We're not approving any funds at this point. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. And we'll get a chance to do that later.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Russell?
Well, if the grant funding is approved, does that require us then to use it? Because if you come back and say the cost for this is prohibitive, I don't want a sliver of funding to lock us into a prohibitively expensive project.
So,
If you said if we apply, we're going to get it,
yes, correct.
but we're applying, but we're looking to, if we get it, do we have to spend it on its intended use, or can we give it back?
Definitely prefer not to give it back. If the scenario you laid out were to come to pass, we would submit an amendment to the grant to change the scope of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Mayor?
In that vein, I would just add,
as we're working through the numbers. We're not asking for immediate, like, it would be great to have it tonight, but we'll give you that information, and then we won't be applying the final application. So if our numbers come back way high and we can't do all of the things on one application, we won't submit the entire amount. So if it comes back at, $600,000 to do the entire project, we'll modify it and focus on the things that would qualify most heavily under the project, would be my recommendation.
So, excuse me, but we're discussing a whole lot of things on the first reading. So,
Yes, but the request is to suspend
I
readings.
understand. Mr. Stashak.
I'll put it back down when I'm done. Hey, real quick, as a historic perspective and a quick note for your benefit and as part of the consideration on this, the east side there, we do have an unlined dump next to and under Cooper Field. And I haven't seen the drawing, and I didn't know the request was going to be made. I only mentioned that as a cautionary measure because with the EPA, how deep your shovel goes matters when you're dealing with an unlined dump. And we had this issue when we wanted to give that piece of ground to the city schools for the bus garage. Couldn't do it. So let's explore that as well. Yep.
Okay. Next.
I think my recommendation would be to have the reading on this particular item, and when more details are known, we can pass it on, give those details to council, and then pass it on an emergency, waive the readings on June 7th. That timeline will work out.
First reading for ordinance 2022-46, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio to execute the necessary grant application or applications and/or agreements to receive grant funds from the Community Development Block Grant Program for the small water line upgrade, project number 35723-800, and declaring an emergency.
You want to,
Oh, sorry. I guess nobody had any questions for you, but you're welcome to comment. Mr. Russell?
yeah, I was going to ask Matt to comment on the project, and once again, same kind of general questions, timelines, and things.
Sure. So this is a critical infrastructure grant through the Community Development Block Grant Program. This is a highly competitive grant. So the proposed project is replacing 4-inch water lines with 6-inch water lines on Allen Avenue, Midland, Garfield, and George Street. The water line issue most recently came up when there was a fire on Garfield and there was insufficient water to fight the fire. So by upgrading and looping these, as I've been explained by the city engineer, I'm not pretending to know all this, this will improve the water circulation pressure. Yeah, come on up.
Yeah, so for proper fire suppression, the minimum size of a line needs to be 6 inches. Those are all old 4 inches, so these are old lines. That's kind of the last area, one of the last areas in Findlay that will have 4-inch lines, and this is a large area that has it. Kind of like Matt was saying, when we had that fire at Garfield, we kind of, this was, kind of brought to the head more just because when they connected to one hydrant, their fire hose they call it collapsing when it kind of sucks the hydrant dry, so they had to go to multiple hydrants to make sure they got enough flow. So with this project, we'll be upgrading all the 4-inch lines to 6-inch lines and also looping them. So when they pull off one hydrant, if it does happen to pull too much water, then there's going to be multiple sources going to one hydrant instead of running all these lines to multiple hydrants. So it is going to be a safety upgrade for the whole area, and like Matt was saying, it is going to help with fire suppression in the area and also for the volume that will be moving through there.
And then the request for the grant will be $500,000, and then as some of you may know, the city of Findlay has a revolving loan fund in which the state is continually asking us to spend it down. we haven't had a lot of activity in the last year or two, other than some small COVID loans that went out. And so our balance is approximately $625,000. In order to be competitive, if we applied for this grant without putting revolving loan fund money in, they would say, great, the grant's approved, pay for it with your revolving loan fund dollars. Meaning they'd give us maybe $100,000 and they'd tell us to use $500,000 of our revolving loan fund. And then we would have to decide if we want to do that. So what we're trying to do is make this a competitive grant by supplying matching funds and meeting their goal of spending down the revolving loan fund. So this is for up to $300,000. Hopefully things come in lower, but up to $300,000 of revolving loan fund dollars. Any questions?
Timeline,
Russell?
timeline once again, and.
We apply in June. We will know September, October. My guess would be we would have 18 months from approval to complete the project.
Do you need it tonight?
It would be helpful, but not necessary. Both grants are due the same day on June 15th.
Mr. Baumann?
So we could do both next June 7th.
So I mean, is this a project we have to do regardless of if the grant is issued in our favor? Is it that important?
And I'll let Jeremy speak to the importance, but there's also one of the aspects of the grant is that the projects have to benefit 51% low to moderate income. So if you take the whole picture of potential projects in the city of Findlay, half those projects are taken away as being ineligible because of the neighborhood by census that they're located in. So not every project is eligible for these funds.
So yes, that will be one of the projects that we would be looking at. It's kind of always been on my radar, but it's a large ticket item. One of the main reasons, like I say, is fire suppression for the area. Never want to jeopardize, the community or anything, safety with that. But that's with the that's going to be kind of something else you guys are going to be seeing with the whole GIS project that will be coming up. That we'll be having all those mapped where you can see the 4-inch lines and what is needing, the water flow, and all that kind of stuff through that.
Mr. Welpser?
Unfortunately, the fire chief isn't here, or maybe somebody from the administration would answer this. Is this project something that we would, once completed, would this help our fire department rating that we've discussed previously?
So the chief is not here, so he's actually teaching some classes in Bowling Green. Everybody's off doing fun things. It will help, but because we do have the majority of our community already upgraded, I don't see this as really hindering
major
our
upgrade.
score on the ISO. And as Jeremy mentioned a little bit, one of the things that we're working on with updating the GIS is that we would be able to show all of these infrastructure items, the age, the kind of condition rating on them, additionally being able to show the census tract overlays. So we could very easily, as we're talking about some of these projects, say, here's our older infrastructure in the qualifying areas, and start kind of teeing up these projects for the future as we bring them to you. So make it a lot more easy so that we have these projects kind of teed up as they roll out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next.
First reading for ordinance 2022-47, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and/or service safety director of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to enter into a purchase agreement or agreements for the acquisition of 3 properties located on Taylor Street, Findlay, Ohio, appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
First reading for ordinance 2022-48, an ordinance amending chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the city of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by rezoning the following described property referred to as Technology Drive and Midwest Court Rezone, which previously was zoned C2 General Commercial to M2 Multifamily High Density. First reading for ordinance 2022-49, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to waive formal advertising and bidding requirements and enter into a contract with RQAW Architecture for the design of the municipal court cask facility and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2022-50, an ordinance authorizing all actions necessary to support the continuation of a governmental natural gas aggregation program with opt-out provisions pursuant to section 4929.26 Ohio Revised Code, directing the mayor to execute a supply agreement with independent energy consultants to continue a natural gas aggregation program effective immediately and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Mayor, if you were all prepared to talk about this the last time. Do you want to fill us in a little bit? I mean, Jeremy's last email put the financial shock of what's going to happen here pretty much out there. But I think we should share those numbers with the public and kind of lay out what's going on here.
Mr. President, am I good?
You were good.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, so apologies, I had a little bit of a brain fog there when I was initially asked. So as you know, the city of Findlay for a while has been doing natural gas aggregation, and our citizens received notification. We received notification earlier this year that Volunteer Energy, our prior supplier, was going bankrupt and was no longer going to be able to provide services to us. I guess the benefit is we received the low prices while they had them, and bad news is it put them out of business. So the Volunteer Energy had their fixed rate at about 43 cents a unit. And so as we've been talking out, the firm that is now the low cost was actually the one that was second low cost previously, and was the firm that we had previously been with before we went over to Volunteer. So they worked very well. They have the same process with mailings, communications to our citizens. So overall, the way that this would be working is there will be a range, and then we're going to be watching it, and then our consultant would lock it in as we see it go down. So fortunately, we're kind of putting in the ceiling once we enter into an agreement, but we won't need to lock it in until we it kind of the last moment and goes lower.
So is the 73 cents the ceiling?
I believe that is correct, but I would just request that you wait, and we'll have Mr. Martin, who has been kind of the one dealing with our consultant on this, can bring it up at the next meeting.
I was under the understanding we needed to lock that tonight, or by the May 20th.
Okay. Yes, then that would be correct. The communications from Mr. Martin and Jeremy are the details of the agreement. So if we need to take action on this tonight, we can do that.
Jeremy, you got any comments?
I've been running around lately, so Jeremy and Rob are on top of it. I apologize.
Yeah, from talking with Rob, my understanding is that 73 cents is the ceiling on that. That I get that what your question was on that, but yes, as part of this, to take advantage of this, of the pricing, the deadline to sign that contract is May 20th, so we would need it passed tonight.
Mr. Russell.
But what they're talking about is giving us a floating rate. Is that?
With a current ceiling of 73. So if it goes down, we'll have the opportunity to get the lower rate. Now the question is, when do they lock it in? I mean, we're playing the market at this point, but we know the maximum amount. It's a normal kind of thing that happens in these type of markets.
Yes, it's been the same structure that we've had in our prior agreements. We hire the consultant who watches the trends, and then locks it in. So the benefit of us signing the contract is then locking in that it won't exceed. So as things continue to get volatile in the market, if rates continue to be difficult to get into, then obviously it could continue to go up, and we could lose out on this ceiling at this point.
Mayor, I'm sorry, Mr. President. Will the process, then we'll have to start this process all over again that we've done, that our citizens have done in the past, have the opt-out letters
Correct.
going out, that you have to opt out or you're automatically opted in?
Correct. Yep, they will receive all the communication. So that's one of the reasons before we really get into the high gas season, being able to do that communication, which the vendor will handle. We'll make sure we do all the press releases as we typically do, putting out information on our website as well.
Very good, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Any other questions? Mr. Station?
I just want to mention for the benefit of the body that I had been provided some information that I forwarded to the mayor and Councilman Wobser. I think the bigger question you need to ask in the future, and we asked it in the past and stepped away from aggregation at one point in time, is not what the opportunity is potentially going forward, but what's the history saying as well. And there's an individual in the community who was very math-oriented and did quite the analysis, and it showed we didn't win very often doing this. So I would say, as we look forward, not necessarily in this case because it's unique with volunteer going bankrupt, but as we look forward, we need to ask that question: has there been a backward-looking payback for us as we look at the numbers over time? Forward-looking on paper, it always looks like we're going to get a good opportunity, and I have shared those spreadsheets with those two individuals. Thank you.
Mr. Wobser?
Jim, yeah, I'm familiar with that. That individual had approached me previously when we did this last contract with a company that went out of business, and I think it would be worthwhile to do that. Of course, it all comes down to how you calculate things, right? And how you look at things, because I had that discussion back then with Paul. Now, Paul would tell you that his numbers show that they were on top. We were winning. And others that would look at it from a different perspective would show a different story potentially. So, but it'd be worthwhile to take a look at that and make sure this is a good endeavor for our citizens. Since, again, I think that's worthwhile because it is an opt-out situation. People are automatically in. You don't get the mail for whatever reason, you're in it because you have to you have to do something to not be in the program. So I think that's worthwhile to do that. And given our very volatile energy markets at this point in time, I think it's even more necessary to take a look and see what we can do to help our citizens get through this time frame of volatile pricing on the petroleum markets.
Any other questions, comments, or motions? Hearing none, that concludes our ordinances this evening. Old business. Mr. Hellman.
If I may, President Harrington, I guess I'd like to go back, and not that I'm looking for a discussion on it, but make sure that it's understood that Auditor Stachek's comments about land banks is his own personal opinion, and certainly not that of this council, and certainly not that of mine. I know many cities, large and small, that have done some pretty marvelous things with land banks to their benefit. And I think the city of Findlay is missing the boat by not pursuing it, or at least getting educated on it. And I think we ought to, the community ought to do that. Thank you.
Mr. Stashek, you had your hand up.
Appreciate that, and I apologize to President Harrington for making him gavel me tonight on that subject. So doesn't happen very often, but I'm sure I deserved it, so it's all good. Hey, real quick, because I don't want to be the last person to speak tonight, the ARPA money, we would like to request that if you can fit us in either the 23rd or 24th, I'd like to do it at 4 p.m. so that my staff doesn't have to stay after, if possible, on one of those two dates, for whether it be an appropriations or committee of the whole, to discuss what we found out. And we have filed the first required annual report on those funds. So we're off and running.
Jim, what were the dates?
23rd or 24th,
So next
Ideal-
week, next Monday or Tuesday?
ideally at 4 p.m.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry?
We would need to do Monday.
Monday? All right, so with that, Mr. President, may
Well,
I?
just a second. I guess I defer to council as whether you want to do that as appropriations committee or do that as a committee of the whole. It's a lot of money, right? There's a lot of choices to be made with that money. I'll leave it up to you guys if you want to all talk about it or you just want to run it through appropriations. Mr. Webster.
That's a good question, Mr. President. I would suggest it go to appropriations. We need to have an appropriations committee meeting anyways, so now we have two topics that we can take care of in one meeting. If the mayor is ready to talk about Taylor Street also, I would suspect on that, which would be this coming Monday. And that would be my suggestion, but I will leave it to the rest of council to say otherwise if they would appreciate a committee of the whole meeting. Of course, you're always welcome to appropriations and you can give your opinion there. Just don't get to vote.
By a show of hands, council of the whole, appropriations it is. Unless you sit on your hands on both questions. Jeez. Mr. Baumann.
I would just ask that all council members receive that meeting notice, just so we make sure we're all, on the same page.
Denise will.
It'll be on the meeting list, but I'll send it out also to everybody. Brian, no problem. Good request.
Any other old business? I guess that Mr. Niemeyer.
What time's that gonna be on the 23rd?
I was going to wait until new business, so I didn't screw up Mr. President's
We'll wait.
meeting.
How about old new business? How about new old business? Go ahead.
I would like to call an appropriations meeting
Well, you're good.
on May 24th to discuss ARPA and the Taylor Street property property purchase. And we would, per the auditor's request, at 4 o'clock, would allow all of our public employees to attend and not miss any of their family time, which I'm fully in agreement with. So let's go with 4 o'clock p.m. And given the fact that I know Brian wants to show up for this, maybe, I don't know, the third floor conference room better, Mayor, or would we prefer to be down here?
I'm assuming there'll be some interest.
I would think so too. So we'll hold that in council chambers if it's available, Denise. Thank you very much. If it needs to change venues, I will let you all know. That is did I say the 24th?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I've already screwed this up, so my apologies.
How about some old new business?
Okay, the 23rd. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other new business? Mr. Russell.
We'll just advance notice, planning and zoning on June 9th, in there, June 9th at noon. So back to our regular time.
Okay.
Mr. Russell, what time did you say?
Noon on June 9. I believe that it.
Other new business? Hearing none. Oh, Mayor?
I was texting Mr. Martin really quick, and he just said, just to reiterate, then we won't be locking in the price for now. We have the volatility the next 3 weeks, and then would be coming back in front of you with new information from our consultant. So just want to reiterate that right now, the market's kind of all over the place, and with the aggregation, it could be up past our 84 when we're locking in at 74 with this. So, and customers do have the option to go to the open market on their own. However, that's fine. That we will move on. So just wanted to let you know that the city of Findlay is still, things are going well with the jail. We have about 25 inmates that we're housing separately outside of the Hancock County Jail. I have had some inquiries recently about expanding the DORA boundaries as well as looking at different hours for specific holidays. So I'm gathering some of that information and then maybe requesting an ad hoc committee be formed here in the next couple of months to discuss that. I would again reiterate the thanks to Revive for the funds supporting Shade Tree, as well as give a shout out to Brian, and I know a couple of other members of council attended the Shade Tree Commission. We celebrated the Tree City USA Northwest Ohio conference in Findlay last week, and co-hosted that with Arcadia, Ottawa, and the University of Findlay. And the city of Findlay was recognized for 40 years as a tree city. So some great things going on, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Any other new business? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Nobody wants to go home? Mr. Russell, second. Mr. Slough. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. We are adjourned.